Good morning, Aletheia Church family. Today in the Daily 5, we're going to continue looking at what God isn't. You see, at times of suffering and of tragedy, it can bring up a lot of questions about God's character and God's motives. And we're taking some of those most obvious questions and seeing how the Bible speaks directly to those. Yesterday we saw that God isn't surprised. He's not taken aback by tragedy and suffering in the world. And though that is certainly true, it can bring up a reactionary question, which is God then just a cold, calculating strategist? I call this the God as chess player view, where he's got a strategy, he's implementing it, and if he has to sacrifice a few pawns to get the job done, that's what he has to do. This isn't a reflection of the God of the Bible either. What we're going to see is that God isn't indifferent. God isn't indifferent. My son recently fell and busted his lip. It's bleeding, all of that. And it's so interesting, the reaction as a parent. You know that these things are going to happen. You know that falling and busting your lip is just a part of growing up. And I know that his lip is going to heal. And at the same time, it pains me to see him suffer. I think this shows us that people, even people, aren't so one-dimensional that even though they see something as important and they see an overarching purpose, it doesn't mean that our feelings about it are somehow extracted from it. And this is absolutely true of God. I mean, my example is kind of small and insignificant in nature, but think about the example of God. And I think we see this most clearly on display in the person of Jesus Christ. There's this fascinating interaction in the Gospel of John where Jesus he's coming into town, and a family who he loves, Lazarus, a friend of his, and his two sisters, Martha and Mary. Lazarus has died. And Martha and Mary approach Jesus, and they're frustrated, and they don't know why Jesus didn't come earlier to heal him and to stop him from dying. And they both say exactly the same thing to Jesus. This is in John chapter 11, verse 21. Martha said to Jesus, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." And then Mary, later, in verse 32 says, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." They say the same thing in their moment of questioning and frustration. Yet Jesus has two different answers. To Martha, here's what Jesus says. Verse 23, "Your brother will rise again." Martha said, "I know he will rise again in the resurrection." Jesus said, "I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live." So Martha approaches Jesus, and Jesus basically gives her a theology lesson. What happens with Mary? Verse 35, shortest verse in the Bible. Jesus wept. Two sisters. One he gives rich theology to, one he weeps compassionately and sympathetically with. Seeing God's character on display in Jesus Christ shows us that he is the God of resurrection hope and the God who weeps with us in our sorrow, all at the same time. God isn't indifferent. My friend, I don't know what you need to hear today from the Scriptures. Maybe you need a theology lesson. Maybe you find yourself despondent and you need to recall the promises of the hope to which you've been called to mind. Maybe today you just need to realize that Jesus weeps with you. He loves you. Your pain is not insignificant to your Savior. And we know this, of course, because he took our pain upon himself on the cross. He is intimately acquainted with what it is to suffer in this life. As Hebrews 4 says, we do not have a Savior who is unable to sympathize with us. My friends, wherever you might be this morning, whatever you might be going through, realize God is the God of resurrection hope and He is the God who weeps with us in our pain. God isn't indifferent. May He bless you.